Welcome to Asian Book Club, where we highlight Asian and Asian American authors. We are your hosts,
Jamae and Sabangan.
and I'm Stephen Park. And today we bring you Read 2 of Vera Wong's Unsolicited Advice for Murderers by Jesse Q. Sutanto. This is such a good read. I am fascinated and continue to be fascinated by this Vera Wong character,
Mm-hmm.
but she's also such a parent. Like, she seems to epitomize what an Asian parent kind of is, especially for like a first generation, almost specific Asian mother.
Absolutely.
So one question I had for you is, because we've talked about in other episodes about how sometimes we'll do things, even last episode, we kind of talked about how our parents can be in our head sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
But my question for you is, what language do you hear your parents in your head? Or when you think about your parents, like in a dream or some form or shape, like what language are they speaking to you in?
Well, they speak to me in English in person. So in my head, they're also speaking to me in English.
Well, okay, maybe not your parents then. What about like your nanai or your grandmother and your grandfather?
Well, they're speaking to me in Tagalog because that's the language they speak in.
Right, and that same thing makes sense to me because my parents, they try to speak more English nowadays just because they've been in this country for such a long time, but
Hmm.
overall they're speaking Korean to me for the most part, especially at home. So if I have something that I'm thinking about my parents, the first thing that comes to mind is them speaking to me in Korean. And I mean, most often it's chastising me in Korean in some sort.
Hmm.
Like, why are you spending money on another pair of Jordans? But they would say that in Korean. So I think it's interesting that here we have a character like Vera Wong who, for some reason in my mind, or the character I thought was described as someone who is a first generation immigrant, right?
Yes.
So we hear her voice in English, which is very helpful as a reading, but I am also curious what Tilly, her son in the book, would hear her voice as.
Well, I'm also thinking that because Vera is supposed to be a first generation immigrant, and in that she's also one who wants to be with the times.
Right, right,
Like she wants to slip and slide into the DMs and
right,
such.
right.
So I think that she tries really hard not to speak in her language.
Fair. And for my parents, both my mother and father, who worked in very people-facing jobs, they did have to speak English more often when they were at their work. So they would then pick up more English. I think now that they're both retired, they are defaulting back to Korean. So I think it's interesting that the voice that sticks with us is that voice because I wouldn't even say my Korean is extremely proficient. Like it's good enough, except for the fact that I just know the words that they would use when they are saying very specific things to me. Like for your mom, if she was to tell you, do what you want,
For sure. She would be speaking in Tagalog. Bahala ka sa buhay mo.
right? So that's what you would hear when she is chastising you.
Yes, exactly. I think it's the chastising that comes to me in Tagalog rather than the everyday speech.
Fair. Do you also feel that Janellis hit you in the face when she says it?
It's not in the face, it's in the butt, in the butt.
Oh, well, things were handled differently in other
Oh, no.
places.
Also, it's dirty. Why would you use chanelas in the face?
Then don't do the thing that you did wrong.
Fair.
But the Janellis in the face is always going to be for a punishment. Let's say they wanted to give you a gift. A good gift would be the thing that we would find in our recommendation for the week.
Our recommendation for the week is Allburn Wax. Allburn Wax, founded by Diana Alberg, makes hand-poured organic soy wax candles and sprays. And if you're in Portland, Oregon, you can also visit their flagship store in Union Way where they also offer plants, AAPI and BIPOC made artisan crafts, and zero waste products. You can learn more about their work on their website at allburnwax.com and on Instagram at allburnwax. That's ALLBURNWAX.
Yep, and recently we actually finally lit our first all-burn wax candle,
Mm-hmm.
which we've had two or three of them kind of lying around the house from different vendor markets that we've gone to.
Yes.
And we can absolutely verify that not only does it smell really good, it is very fragrant, so it actually comes out in that smell instead of just smelling good in the glass.
Yes.
So that's all-burn wax, and that is our recommendation for the week. All right. So Vera Wong's Unsolicited Advice for Murderers by Jesse Q. Sutanto. This is our second read. This was pages 85 through 169 in the physical copy, but for everyone, it was chapters 11 through 20. Now, what do we know up to this point?
So far, we're introduced to Vera's distinguished and meticulous character. Vera also finds, during the read, a dead man named Marshall Chen in her tea shop, where she snatches the flash drive that was in his hand before the police arrive. Later, we're also introduced to a cast of characters who may or may not be suspects, including Julia, Ricky, Sana, and Oliver.
Right, and these characters are becoming much more stable characters than flyby characters,
Yes.
two of which are seemingly in a very long term, not like relational relationship, not like,
Not romantic.
yeah, not romantic, not sensual in any way, but a relationship that has gotten them to become very close. And so that's Julia and Oliver.
Yes, Julia and Oliver are best friends since high school. However, since Marshall came into the picture, they ended up separating and not really talking to each other, even as they as in Marshall and Julia got married, even when Julia and Marshall had their first child, Emma, there was this disconnect with the relationship among the three of them.
Right, and I think it's because Oliver maybe very likely was always jealous of the situation because it seemed like Oliver had a crush on Julia.
Yeah.
Because he talks about how Marshall never realized how wonderful Julia is, didn't even really want to go out with Julia, it seemed like. And whether that's true or not, there was very much a jealous tone behind everything that Oliver would say in speaking about their relationship.
Mm-hmm. And then there was not much communication after that.
Right. So in these chapters, we see that relationships start to form again. And it all starts obviously because of Marshall's death, which is a tragedy. But
Mm-hmm.
we see the immediate effect that Oliver has not only on Julia and being able to comfort her, but we also see Oliver and Emma, Julia and Marshall's child. We see that relation start to form, and we see much more of a fatherly figure in Oliver than it seems like we've ever had with Marshall.
Right, because Marshall's style of parenting, quote unquote,
Hmm.
was to get angry all the time. And you can see that by the way Emma first reacts to Oliver when he comes into the door, and she thinks that Oliver is her father.
Right. We also see it in the way that Julia is constantly second guessing her parenting and everything that she could possibly do with Emma,
Right.
going from simply as just wanting to play with Emma and like lick the what rip,
Custard.
yeah, the custard off of her arm, the noodle that lands on Oliver, and just constantly feeling like she's doing every parenting decision wrong.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where we see Oliver kind of reinforcing some of the better behaviors and even putting that tent in Emma's room so that Emma had a place that she can go off on her own.
Yes.
So not only is he entering this life for Julia in a way that hopefully is a sense of peace, but is also giving Emma a life that she's probably never been offered before.
Mm-hmm. I thought that was interesting, the point when Oliver asked to set things up in Emma's room. I think that if I were the parent, I would just be super shocked that he would think of that so fast.
Yeah, and I think Julia was the same. Is
Hmm.
I don't think she was, well, we know that she wasn't expecting it. I don't even think she thought that he would be there after 20 minutes, just, kind of doing the breastfeeding and everything.
Mm-hmm.
I think Oliver is truly going out of his way to be a good human. We know that he was always a good uncle because he always sent gifts to Emma.
Right.
It's just now he's trying to be there for her both physically and maybe filling in this role of fatherhood that is now lost on her.
For sure.
What do you think of this relationship between Oliver and Julia?
I think it's very sweet, and I think that this reconnection is a place where things can go well.
I also agree, except for its very biblical times. Like the brother passes
Oh,
away,
I
so
see.
the next brother gets the wife kind of thing.
Well, if you think about it, Oliver was supposed to get the girl first. Quote unquote, get the girl.
True. It's also a little creepier to me that they're also twins.
That's fair. I thought of that too, and that the biblical times thing as well as the twins thing.
Yeah. I still am rooting for it. I'm hoping there are things in the book that will progress this, like make me want to root for them more and kind
Mm.
of shake off some of the dirty feelings of uh is not quite incest, but like that kind of vibe, I guess.
What do you?
Inter family marrying. That's not really inter-family. I don't know.
Well, it is an interfamily. It is from brother to brother,
I mean, she became family when she married Marshall, right?
right? Because now they are sister and brother-in-law.
That's kind of
It's
inter-family-ish.
in law. They're not by blood.
So they're gross in law.
I
I don't know. I'm still rooting for it though.
am still rooting for it as well.
So we'll see where that goes, but there's a lot of good behind that.
Yes.
The other good that we see, and this is more of like a cutesy, like, oh, what's gonna happen relationship, is between Ricky and Sana.
With Ricky and Sana, they are both suspects, right?
Yeah, technically.
Technically, or at least in Vera's eyes, they're both suspects.
Right.
They can be suspects to us as well, but we already said in the previous episode that we don't think that they're truly the ones to blame.
Right. We really don't know their whole roles yet, although a little bit is being peeled back as we're going on. But what we do know is that there's seemingly a version of a love interest kind of going on.
Right, because Ricky sees Sana in this light and not only realizes that she was the one exiting the tea shop when he went there, but he also notices that she looks kind of gorgeous.
Right. And that's the thing that woos him. For Sana, it's still a lot of suspicion around Ricky. I don't know if she necessarily has a ton of interest in him at this point.
I don't think so, but I think that the suggestion that Vera said to both of them that they could be a good match might be enough to spark some interest.
Right. And we also are told that Ricky is a very handsome person, a very good-looking person.
Yes.
So usually that person is liked by a lot of people,
Mm-hmm.
including possibly Sana. We see them in a cab together. We see them in all these little instances that tend to put them in the same place.
Yes.
And I don't know, maybe they'll connect via their lies of, because, they both ended up lying about being journalists of some sort.
Right. They both lied, but they both are at this stopping point where they kind of agreed silently
Hmm.
that they wouldn't out each other.
Right, 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 right. So we'll see what happens there. At this point, it's not quite a large plot line within everything that we're getting to.
But how hard are you rooting for them?
I'm rooting for them. Not quite as much as the incestual couple.
Oh my gosh, we can't keep calling them that.
Well, we can call them, let's see, it's Julia and Oliver. So it's either Jolliver or Ulia. I'm rooting for Ulia.
Okay,
I don't know about Siki.
that
Rana.
sounds weird.
Rana. I'm rooting for Oliver, but not for Rana.
If that's Ulia.
Ulia. So, a much bigger plot line
Yes.
is kind of what we noticed from the feast. So,
Mm-hmm.
it happens earlier on in the read than later, but we get this big feast that's held at Julia's place. It's something that Vera's kind of planned together without anyone else knowing what's going to happen. So, in Vera's eyes, what she's trying to do is get all the suspects in one room, and she's using this feast and helping the widow feel more comfortable as a scapegoat for making people meet in the same room.
Right. She's kind of making this feast to care for each person. Like she does mention that, yes, Julia looks very pale and very sickly, so she needs to eat this food. And then she says that Emma needs to eat this food because she's a growing child.
Right.
And then she also says that Ricky needs to eat this food because he always looks constipated.
Right. And this is a part that I think Vera's character, as annoying as it may seem, has such a redeeming quality because she has so much good intent behind all of her decisions.
Absolutely.
And I think one of the places we see that the most is the relationships that she has with Emma. So
Hmm.
we see the relationship early on with her and Tilly, her adult son,
Yes.
and we see it as overbearing, we see it as too much, and her not understanding boundaries.
Mm-hmm.
In this scenario, we see Vera once again not understanding boundaries. She pretty much breaks into
Barges
the
into the
kitchen. Yeah, like she has her way in to the point where Julia's like, I didn't even realize what was going on. Like,
house.
And now this lady's in here with my child alone and working in my kitchen. But what we see is Emma delighting in this, and we see Emma's personality finally come out for the first time in this book.
Right.
And she's not only having fun, she's eating more than she ever has. She's starting to open up to strangers and new people. And I don't know, for me, this was such a big character point for Vera, this person who, once again, we're kind of on this fence of should we like her, shouldn't we like her? Because she does all these really annoying things, but then she does these things like she makes tea and brings Alex or that guy, her favorite customer, like the food and everything.
Yeah.
And I think through all the annoyance, it's just the way that she cares for people.
Exactly. I think that her personality has so much charisma that it is easy to look beyond the annoyances.
Right. To be honest, I absolutely love my mom. There's no person that I think could ever compare to her. Sorry, Jamae, but truly, like, she is one of the most wonderful, sweetest people in the world. But she still, till this day, can annoy me. Like, one of the things that she does is when we go home on trips, she always asks me what I want to eat. And I always tell her I want to eat food because we're around the LA and Orange County area. I'm like, I want to eat
Hmm.
food there. There's massive amounts of crazy good food there, and I want to eat it. So I tell her, don't make me anything. Don't worry about it. I'll figure it out. And then every other morning, maybe not every morning that we wake up, but every other morning, I'll find food, like a whole meal on the kitchen table as like a breakfast, or hey, I made this so you can eat this later on. I'm like,
Hmm.
what are like, I told you that we weren't gonna eat here, and it's made out of so much love.
Yes.
And then now this guilt plays on me of like, okay, so I guess I have to eat this, but then I can't do this thing. And it's like, ugh, like the annoyance of it, which I know for a lot of people it doesn't sound annoying, but I promise you there is an annoyance to it. I think that's what I feel with Vera's character, and I think that's why it does tug at a heartstring is she comes from such a place of love, although she may not understand those boundaries.
Absolutely. When I think about your mom, I also think about my nanay.
Hmm.
Nanay does the same thing in
Yeah.
that even though we say we don't want this food, like we explicitly say we don't want this food, she's still gonna make us dinner regardless.
Hmm. And you've warned me that she makes too much food.
Yes.
She does not. I always finish all of her stuff, and that's why she loves me, because
Yes.
I am a growing boy. So, I mean, that is Vera, and we keep finding these instances of Vera that we are loving and that we can find such good redeeming qualities for.
Mhm.
And then the next thing is we find the stuff that annoys us again. So, Vera, within this dinner, finally reveals the plan that everyone is now supposed to tell Vera who actually committed the murder.
Right. And in her words on page 109, she says, "Okay, so now we talk real business. Which one of you here killed Marshall?"
Right. It wasn't masked or clouded, which is
No.
Vera.
Exactly. And she gets right to it and asks these questions while jotting down notes to
Hmm.
everyone's surprise as well.
Hmm. And once again, she's been doing this, just other people didn't notice that she had done this.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, she just wants to get to the whole meat of the situation.
Totally. So let's back up a little bit. The way that she sets things up is she creates a feast to get everyone relaxed and then gets down to business.
Hmm.
Do you think this is just a Vera thing or is this an Asian trait?
How do you mean?
Do you think that other Asians or other Asians in general would go about talking serious things after having a meal?
So the funny thing is, I think the way I grew up is we always talked about the business things before meals.
That's what I was gonna say.
And for us, it's always been, let's get this dirty part out of the way, and then we'll heal by all eating together. And it's usually
Mhm.
then forced, like, okay, everyone has to sit around this meal. And if you know Korean style meals, it's like panchan and stuff. And then there's usually a jjigae in the middle. So it's like we're
Mhm.
all eating from the same pot. So you have this bonding period of everyone sharing that family meal. And
Yeah.
it's similar in a lot of cultures where it's like, you have the things in the middle that everyone's scooping
Scoops
off
out
of,
of. Mhm.
which says a lot to how we're so connected with each other.
Exactly. So, do you think it's a Vera thing then?
I don't. I also know that there's a lot of things that do happen at meals. So if we think about other things like bigger movies and stuff like that that do depict and portray different Asian families. And honestly, we've had different events where we've gone to, and the main purpose was to announce something or to show something. So I do think there are very important topics that are talked to at dinner,
I see.
even in Brother Son, which we saw.
Yes.
They would hold the feast so that they can talk about the
Mm,
bigger topics or whatever the plan is. So
right.
so maybe it's more of a Chinese custom or cultural thing or something in that area of Asia that uses that as a more customary method to talk about these big events.
It's possible.
But I know just in our household, and it might be a Korean thing too. I know there's a lot of drinking that happens, and that's when a lot of things come out in Korean cultures, just parts that I've known. But at least in our household, it's always been like, okay, let's do the dirty deed, and then let's reconnect by eating and enjoying things together again.
Right. Like, let's heal together after this hard talk.
Right. And so within this, not a lot comes out. No one's obviously going to say, I did it. And from my standpoint, I still am not sure if any of these people did anything.
I doubt any of them did anything.
But before we can even get solid answers, I think Sana was the person who was stuck on, and Sana didn't want to answer.
Yes.
And at that moment, we get Officer Gray coming in and announcing that Marshall's death was due to an anaphylactic shock.
Mm-hmm. And that was an allergic reaction to bird dander.
Right. Which also sounds super suspicious when we follow Vera's role in all this,
Mm-hmm.
because she says there's no like duck feathers, and then we find out that the shock was because it was swallowed, which doesn't really make sense because you wouldn't swallow feathers usually, or the dander is
Right.
different than the meat of even if you ate like chicken, it wouldn't be the
Right.
same.
Right.
So then it creates a real suspicion of how
How
did he actually
exactly?
die? Yeah.
Mm.
This is a part that we don't quite know yet. Another mystery that kind of stumbles onto our lap is this artwork that's in this apartment that we find out about through Julia and Oliver.
Right. Oliver checks out Marshall's secret apartment at Julia's request and finds all these art pieces. There's sculptures, there's oil paintings, there are cartoon drawings, all from different artists. And the weird thing to them is that neither knew Marshall to be an art fanatic.
And by all accounts, he wasn't.
No.
And it makes more sense when Sana enters back into the apartment later on, and it comes out from her point of view that maybe Marshall still wasn't an art collector, but he was in it for the money. So, like the NFTs
Mm-hmm.
and different valuable pieces that Sana keeps claiming he stole away from different artists. And we
Mm-hmm.
don't know what that means yet.
Right. And in her defense, she's trying to steal it back
Right.
in order to get out of her mental block.
Right. And it seems like she just wants her pieces back. Like, I
Right.
think the thievery of her art is what's hurting her and not necessarily, well, also what he did, she hates. But I think she's just trying to get her sanity back more than her art, like you said.
Mm-hmm.
The last thing that we get that's kind of a what the heck is happening is Vera's shop is broken into again.
Yeah.
So we find out about this through Julia, getting a phone call from Vera,
Mm-hmm.
and we don't know anymore because this is where the chapter ends.
Right. It's our own personal cliffhanger.
Right. What do you think is happening with this break-in?
I think there truly is a murderer,
Uh-huh.
and maybe they don't have anything to do with the flash drive, or maybe they do have something to do with the flash drive.
Speaking of flash drive, I think you're bringing up the point that I was thinking and forgot to mention.
Hmm.
The NFTs have to be on that flash drive.
True.
Like, that has to be worth so much money that Vera is holding in her hands.
Mm-hmm.
Because when we hear Sana talk about the artwork and these NFTs, she says it must be on some kind of physical thing, like a computer
For
or a
sure.
hard drive, but she never mentions a flash
Flash drive.
drive. But
Mm,
knowing that it was held in his hand, I don't know a better place that it could be than in that flash drive.
for sure. Which makes me wonder, how did this murderer get away without grabbing the flash drive to begin with?
True, we don't know, but I also agree that it must be the murder. I think Vera's first instinct of the murderer coming back to the scene of the crime was correct,
Right.
which might be this.
Exactly.
I think a lot of Vera's intuitions are going to continue to be correct in weirder ways than very direct.
Totally.
But we won't know until we get into our next read, which is our third of the four reads. So, what will we be reading next?
We'll be reading pages 170 through 252 on the physical copy, and for everyone, that's chapters 21 through 29.
Yep, and if you're enjoying this book as much as we are, and you're asking the same questions that we are of who has done it, then you can reach us where?
You can email us at asianbookclubpod@gmail.com, or you can join us in conversation at Asian Book Club Pod on Instagram.
Yep, and we also have our website, which is asianbookclubpod.com. That has our bookstore that have books that we've read in the past, books that we're currently reading, and books that we plan to read in the future.
And a great way to support us is to rate, review, and subscribe to the podcast.
Yep, and also make sure to be happy, be healthy, and read a book.
Ingat!
Bye.
Bye!